Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a truly fascinating report on how ancient history is being directly leveraged in a high-stakes modern geopolitical dispute. We're looking at a situation where millennia-old archaeological sites are suddenly front and center in international diplomacy, water rights, and even national security. It's a really complex web, and we're going to untangle it step by step. Because, as global resources start to shrink, the ways nations justify claiming those resources are getting increasingly creative. And honestly, that affects absolutely all of us.
So, why is a modern nation suddenly claiming a 5,000-year-old civilization? Let's kick things off with a cultural anomaly that hooks right into a critical global crisis over water resources. The source material outlines how Pakistan is enthusiastically embracing the ancient Indus Valley civilization as a core part of its national identity. Now, you might be thinking, okay, what's the big deal about celebrating ancient history? Well, as we'll see, the timing and the motivation behind this sudden rediscovery point to something way larger than just archaeological pride. It's about survival, it's about leverage, and it's about attempting to rewrite the script of who owns the future by literally claiming the deep past.
Okay, let's get into part one, a sudden historical shift.
This comparison brilliantly illustrates the pivot. For decades, Pakistan's state-sponsored narrative in school textbooks taught that its history essentially began with the Islamic conquest of Sindh by Muhammad bin Qasim in 712 CE. But suddenly, the nation is actively embracing a 5,000-year-old pre-Islamic past. It is astonishing to see a modern nation fundamentally change its origin story almost overnight. The focus has heavily shifted to sites like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, which date way back to around 3000 BCE. The source notes that fresh excavations even commenced at Mohenjo-Daro in June 2025, which is wild, because that site had remained largely untouched since an American archaeologist excavated it all the way back in 1965.
And state-backed campaigns are aggressively promoting specific pre-Islamic sites all across the country to build out this new identity. It's not just the famous Indus Valley cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. They're actively promoting Taxila, which preserves these really fascinating layers of Mauryan, Indo-Greek, and Kushan history, along with Vedic and Buddhist traditions. They're highlighting Gandhara's rich Buddhist heritage and the incredibly ancient Neolithic site of Mehergar over in Baluchistan. The goal here is to present this uninterrupted civilizational continuum, extending back thousands of years, weaving all these diverse ancient threads into a single national fabric. But the source asks a critical question: why this sudden, massive shift in focus right now?
Well, that brings us to Section 2, the Indus Waters Crisis.
To really understand the stakes here, we absolutely have to look at the 1960 Indus Waters Treaty. This is a vital hydrological agreement between India and Pakistan, two nuclear-armed neighbors, dictating exactly how they share the literal lifeblood of their region, the waters of the massive Indus River system. For decades, this treaty has miraculously survived wars, border skirmishes, immense political tension. It was often heralded as this ultimate triumph of diplomacy. But recently, the dynamic has fundamentally shifted, throwing this crucial treaty into deep, unpredictable uncertainty.
The source explicitly connects a pretty rapid chain of events to explain this. First, following a terror attack in Pahalgam, where 28 civilians in Jammu and Kashmir were killed by Islamabad-backed terrorists, India launched Operation Sindoor and essentially suspended or placed in abeyance the Indus Waters Treaty. Just months later, in June 2025, Pakistan launched its highly publicized fresh excavations at Mohenjo-Daro. The timing, according to the source, is absolutely not a coincidence. It represents a highly calculated response to a modern crisis, basically leveraging ancient history as a diplomatic shield. India's stance, meanwhile, is firmly rooted in modern security and practical needs. As this pretty powerful quote from Prime Minister Narendra Modi illustrates, New Delhi argues that the 1960 agreement simply cannot continue unchanged while cross-border terrorism persists. Furthermore, India contends that the treaty is just lopsided in today's context. They argue it grants Pakistan extensive rights over the river system that simply do not reflect today's changing climate realities, shifting monsoon patterns, and India's own rapidly growing domestic water needs.
In stark contrast, we have the rhetoric coming from Pakistan. Pakistani leaders like PPP chief Bilal Bhutto Zardari are actively fusing their opposition to the treaty suspension with this newly embraced civilizational claim. By calling Pakistan the true custodian and defender of the Indus, they are essentially arguing that hosting the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro gives Pakistan an undeniable, historic right to the river itself. It's a framing that deliberately attempts to elevate a modern treaty dispute into a defense of ancient heritage.
Which leads perfectly into Section 3, Merging Heritage and Geopolitics.
Islamabad is really seeking to add a deep historical and emotional dimension to what is at its core a legal and hydrological dispute. They're releasing slick state documentaries, they're accelerating diplomatic efforts at the United Nations, and taking the issue to the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. One Pakistani commentator even explicitly stated that the Indus River is to Pakistan what the Nile is to Egypt, claiming you can't claim the legacy of a river you don't actually hold. Meanwhile, they're framing India's actions as the weaponization of water, while simultaneously issuing severe verbal attacks and potential military threats through leaders like Defense Minister Khwaja Asif. The strategy here is crystal clear. Use the universally respected Indus Valley narrative to win international sympathy and aggressively challenge India on the world stage. But let's ground this back in the facts. Section 4, Archaeology and Legal Realities. This brings us to a fundamental question the source raises. Can a 5,000-year-old archaeological site actually dictate the terms of a 20th century water treaty? Look, it is an incredibly compelling argument emotionally, especially when national pride is on the line. But when we step back and look at the hard facts, the science, and international law, the picture gets incredibly complicated for Pakistan's exclusive claims.
Archaeologically speaking, claiming exclusive ownership of such a vast, ancient culture is, well, highly problematic. While some of the earliest and most famous sites are in Pakistan today, a majority of the known Harappan sites are actually located in present-day India, specifically along the dry channels of the Ghaggar-Hakra system. Many scholars identify this network as the ancient Sarasvati River. This undeniable geographical reality is exactly why top Indian archaeologists prefer the term Indus-Sarasvati civilization. And it's not just India. Pakistan's other neighbors are actively pushing back on these broad heritage claims too. When Pakistan's President Zardari claimed Gagahara heritage as distinctly theirs, former Afghan President Hamid Karzai delivered a pretty sharp rebuke, reminding him that Gandhara's historic heartland actually largely lies in present-day Afghanistan.
Ultimately, the source concludes that the dispute over the Indus waters requires a contemporary scientific assessment. Water rights are governed by binding legal agreements that absolutely must be reviewed and updated over time. They're dictated by current water availability, immense climate pressures, and the future survival needs of the massive populations involved today. So while invoking Mohenjo-Daro might build a fiercely strong domestic narrative and maybe win some sympathy abroad, it doesn't actually alter the legal realities on the ground. The treaty has to reflect present-day facts, and, as the source notes, it must address India's very real concerns regarding changing water needs and cross-border terrorism.
I want to leave you with this provocative thought to consider. We are watching a modern state selectively rewrite its national history in real time to gain leverage over a dying river system. As climate change continues to stress vital global resources, and as water becomes dangerously scarce, is the weaponization of ancient history becoming a brand new frontier in modern geopolitical conflicts? It's a fascinating, if somewhat unsettling trend to watch closely. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep diving into the facts behind the narratives.